ARE Podcast, episode number 49.
Welcome to the ARE Podcast. Where it's all about encouraging and inspiring you today so you can fulfill your dream of becoming a licensed architect tomorrow. And now your host, David Doucette.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the ARE Podcast. Once again, joined by my co-host, Eric Corey Fried. Eric, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. And today we're going to talk about some NCARB statistics and some pass rates for second-time takers, which actually is quite interesting. And I think this is going to be an applicable episode for a lot of candidates, Eric. So what do we have?
Well, first of all, nothing says exciting like statistics, I know. But NCARB does this annual report called their NCARB by the numbers, and their 2021 numbers were very interesting to us because of what kind of light they shed on the state of what COVID did in 2020 and on maybe the future of licensure to come.
And as an overall, are we talking about the second time test takers, or are we more broader than that right now before we jump into that?
Well, before we jump into that, let's just talk about the state of licensure right now. 2020 was a obviously crazy, awful year for everybody and for everything. But that being said, it did affect testing a great deal. The testing centers were closed for only 2 of those months, but yet testing fell by 29% in 2020. So is that because of COVID? Is it because the testing centers were closed for 2 months? Or was it really maybe indicative of a larger idea that people were afraid to take the test or looking for an excuse to not take the test?
Well, we do know for a fact that I think many candidates used it as an excuse to maybe step away from the process because, here we are. The testing centers, as you said, were closed a couple of months last year in the middle of 2020. And we still get emails every once in a while about, hey, I want to take the testing, so the testing centers are open back up or whatever it is. We were answering those questions a lot last year. Candidates just assumed testing centers were closed for a long time last year, and it was really only 2 months.
Yeah, I can say that as recently as April 2021, I was getting questions on the free calls of, hey, are the testing centers open again? And it's like, yeah, dude, the testing centers have been open for a year. Where have you been? So I think people just kind of didn't bother to look. They didn't bother to check. They assumed the testing centers were closed the entire time, which they weren't. And as a result, licensure fell. And that's, say what you will about that, if people are just too lazy to look or not. But it did affect the overall numbers of performance, and I'm sure that NCARB was upset about that. But I think the larger lesson from that is that people took it as an excuse to just not study.
In terms of licensure being down, you are speaking specifically to the number of architectural or number of candidates actually completing the process and getting their license through their state board. That's what you're talking about, licensure down.
Oh yeah, across the board, the number of candidates ready for licensure fell by 29% from 2019. And then in 2020, over 30,000 individuals were actively working towards their licensure, meaning that they were reporting their experience to NCARB or taking the examination or both. So 30,000 people, but that's still a 20% decrease from the people that were doing the same thing in 2019. So kind of across the board, you just saw the numbers just kind of compress.
It's a ripple effect. I guess it starts at the beginning of, those starting the licensure process, and then just kind of petering out or just stopping or putting on hold, then that creates a ripple effect down the line.
And then the one number that was the most confusing to me was that of the people who have an active NCARB record, meaning they're paying their annual fees and they're maintaining an active record, there was a 37% drop in people recording their experience. So, just reporting to NCARB, hey, I worked this year, let this chip away at my AXP record. There was a 37% drop among those people. So I don't know if just they were using COVID as just, well, I guess I'm just going to step away from all of this and worry about it later. But it almost feels like a third of people actively working towards becoming architects were, for lack of a better word, putting their career on hold this last year.
And I guess that is the first step in this process, is the AXP and getting through that process. So if we saw a 37% decrease in 2020, there's obviously a ripple effect for that. And I'm wondering the numbers in 2021, for example, where that will compare and how many people will actually be taking the test, because obviously we have to get through AXP, we have to get through the authorization to test process through NCARB before they allow us to take our first test. So we may see the numbers kind of stagnate for 2021 because it starts from AXP essentially.
Yeah, and every firm is somewhat different. My firm and my friends' firms all survived 2020 pretty well. We were busy and didn't see any slowdown. But if you had a firm that was solely focused on, let's say, hospitality, your firm might have seen a huge slowdown and maybe even some layoffs. But overall, it seems the architecture industry was not as affected as, let's say, the restaurant industry was in 2020. And so it doesn't explain, well, why would you stop reporting your hours for AXP? Why would you stop studying? Why would you stop taking your license? Other than maybe they just wanted an excuse to take a break and deal with the other stresses of COVID and life that were going on.
So that 37% decrease of not reporting to AXP, it's not likely that means 37% of the people or the workforce in AXP were laid off, because architecture maintained, relatively health, right, during 2020, as you said, not like the restaurant industry. So if most of those 37% that dropped off were still employed, then it just sounds like, yeah, I didn't really bother to report my AXP or keep track of it this year.
Yeah, and I don't want this to become a podcast episode where we're complaining about candidates slowing down, but all of these numbers in this kind of, in this NCARB look at the numbers, by the numbers report, it was pretty dismal, right? The total number of tests just administered in 2020 also fell by 35%. So almost an equivalent amount, right? Less than 30,000 divisions were tested in 2020. And again, there wasn't a 35% unemployment rate in the architecture field. There's no correlation other than COVID happened, and I think it just caused people to maybe reassess what their priorities were for the year.
As a candidate right now listening to this podcast, why do I care about these statistics? Like, explain that to me. How are they relevant to me?
Because, and this to me is the most pressing, and if you get nothing out of this episode, just this one thing, that the process of getting your license is an echo chamber. The candidates, they go on Facebook, they go on Instagram, they go on all the little groups and forums, and they reinforce each other's belief system, right? Which is why we hear people every day tell us the things that they tell us about the test that are just wrong, right? It's just this echo chamber where they kind of spread this misinformation all the time. And one of these bits would be, I hear the testing centers are still closed. Oh, really? Okay. And then nobody takes the test, right? 35% of people don't take the test because they just assume the testing centers are closed and they never bother to check. So that to me is why these numbers are important. That's why we should be listening to this. Don't use what's going on in the world as an excuse to stop your career pathway and your career goals. Take your stupid test, study for it, take it, and get it done as quickly as possible.
What other statistics do we have? Do we have anything uplifting out of the 2020 NCARB year in review?
Yes. Yeah. There were two uplifting bits, and this will be good news. The first one is that overall 5.0 has a higher pass rate than 4.0. So if you were using 5.0 as an excuse of why here that it's harder, the pass rates are 2% higher under 5.0 than they were under 4.0. It's not much, but it's a slight whatever. And I know candidates are obsessed with the pass rates of all these divisions, and maybe that'll give you an indication that now's the time that you should be taking this.
What is that percentage pass rate?
Well, overall, across all of the tests, it's 54% nationwide for all the tests. And then each of the individual tests, of course, has their own pass rate.
And so, okay, let's take this 54%. So that's up 2%. So 52% was 4.0?
Yeah, on average, and it varies from year to year. But generally speaking, if you were thinking in your head that 5.0 is somehow harder than 4.0, the numbers are indicating, well, that's not actually the case. 2% higher pass rate for 5.0. That's the first bit of good news.
In 54%, that sounds difficult, right? To sort of say the new candidate, only 54% people are getting through this process. There's a couple of things to understand here. First off, they can't have an exam that has a 90% pass rate because, as we've talked about before, that lowers the credibility of this entire process. It lowers the credibility of our profession. It lowers the credibility of achieving our license, right? So it has to be somewhere around where they're making it, and NCARB has been at this for many years. And the California supplemental exam, for those of you in California, you will cross this when you finish the ARE. You will then have to approach the California Architects Board again to get authorization to test for the California supplemental exam, which is it's your 7th test essentially in California. And their pass rate is around 54% for first-time test takers. It's been that for years, even when it was oral, 10 plus years ago. So my sense is that the industry, the people who are creating these tests, NCARB and California Architects Board and the like, have determined that 54%-ish is a pass rate that is, gives credibility to this process, and also, makes it obviously possible to achieve that. And that's how they, when they release 5.0 or they do different things, they withhold scores and they scale it like, they used to do in high school. So none of this is on a whim. It's a very calculated process. And to me, I think it's very fair. I know, again, 54 sounds low, but we can't have a test that everybody passes on the first time. Then we look like, hacks, right?
Well, and also keep in mind that of the 6 divisions, they all have different pass rates. Construction and evaluation, for example, famously has the highest pass rate at 66%, and PPD, project planning and design, has the lowest pass rate, very famously, at only 45%. Keep in mind, none of this matters to you and your performance on the test. These are just the average pass rates. Right? It doesn't mean that you have a 45% likelihood to pass PPD. It just means that of everyone that took it, 45% passed. That's all that it means. So I know candidates love to read into these pass rates. In fact, so many people take CE first because that has the highest pass rate, when in fact you shouldn't be taking CE first. You should probably be taking, probably practice management first, because you'll go in rather unbiased with it. And that being said, practice management did have the highest number of tests administered last year, oddly enough. Of the nearly 30,000 tests given in 2020, 6,000 of them were for practice management.
Wow. So if we followed that through, because we do know many candidates do start with practice management, that if they started with practice management last year and those 6,000 didn't carry through to the other divisions, that would seem to lead us to believe that some of those people just dropped off after practice management. Is that what we can get from that?
I don't know, because there are 3 clear trends that you and I have seen in our coaching, which is, number one, that candidates don't have any idea what order to take the tests in, so they tend to take them in the order listed on the NCARB website, which is, by the way, arbitrary. Number 2, that they tend to focus on pass rates so much so they like to start with CE, construction evaluation, since it has the highest pass rate, but end up failing because they go in unprepared. And then finally, number 3, a lot of them take project management because they think that's what they do at work all day, whereas we've been encouraging people not to do that because you're going to go in rather biased, thinking of yourself as a project manager. That being said, it was surprising that practice management is overwhelmingly the front runner in terms of first tests and total tests given, right? 4,000 were first time attempts and then another almost 2,000 in retakes. Compare that to, let's say, PPD, where there are only 2,700 people taking it for the first time and then another 3,000 in retakes.
Let's back that up for a second. So practice management, again, this is 2020 numbers. Practice management, 6,000. And did you say PPD 2,800?
PPD was 2,800 first time with another 29 something for retakes, so a total of around 5,800. So pretty close second, PPD. But you'll notice that there's way more retakes of PPD. This makes sense, right? PPD has a lower pass rate. More people are intimidated and scared by it. So that's also going to affect their performance. So basically, it's almost 50-50 from first-timers versus retakes, whereas on practice management, it is a slightly higher pass rate, and so you have a lot more people taking it for their first and hopefully final time, and then many fewer retakes. And if you look at the graph that we'll post in the podcast, you can see what we mean here.
And what was the other happy statistic you had, which I'm not sure if I would consider the 54% necessarily good news if I'm the candidate, but what was your other one?
The other one is that the overall time it takes to finish your AREs is relatively the same. It's still 2.6 years. It's slightly up from last year, but still it's 2.6 years to get through. That to us is good. As you know, in our coaching program, we really push people to take all 6 tests within a year, knowing that they can fit in retakes along the way, because we're really trying to get people to not drag it out. But 2.6 years is good. If you find that you've been in this process for longer than 2.5 years, maybe that's a good sign that you got to stop the excuses and really, put your feet in the fire and get this thing finished.
Yeah. And you could also reach out to us in our coaching program, because we do get a lot of people who have been at this for a while, have tried it on their own. From back, we've got 3.0 people in our coaching room. We have several 4.0 people, but I also took 7 years to get through this process, so I get it. And it wasn't because of test anxiety or any of that. I was running my own firm, and a lot of the excuses that you guys probably have, I just, wasn't dedicating the time. But when Eric and I took it, there was 9 exams. There was a 6-month retake period. Now there's 6 exams, 60-day retake period. There really isn't any reason for anyone to be in this longer than a year and a half. And that's being generous. I think a year is a very doable goal. We teach candidates to take one every 2 months. Pass or fail, you keep taking one every 2 months. You fit in your retake. More than likely you'll be done in a year. If not a year, you'll have passed 5 and you probably got that, 1 left. But NCARB has made it very easy for us to not keep delaying this. They made it very easy for us to keep the momentum, and there's only 6 exams. So a year and a half would be my goal if I was doing this now.
Well, you bring up a great point, right? The wait time is 60 days, and even though NCARB shrunk the wait time from 6 months to 60 days, the speed to finish the entire ARE did not shrink, where you think it would have, right? If it went from 6 months to 60 days, the overall time to get through all the ARE, instead of 2.6 years, should have shrunk by, I don't know, at least 6 months, and it didn't.
It didn't.
I think people are dragging it out still, right? What happens and what we've seen over and over and over again is they take the test, they don't really prepare the right way, they end up failing, and they internalize that fail so deeply that they kind of avoid it for 3, 4, sometimes 8, 9 months, and before they finally feel guilty that they have to get back into it. And all of those things are just a terrible procession of feelings that you're going through to do something as important as getting your licensure.
Well, and we still get you, and especially you through the web chat, you get the panic chats about my my rolling clock is expiring in 8 months and I've got all 6 to do, or I've got 3 left to do, or whatever it is. Procrastinating is what we do. Again, I took 7 years to get through this process, so I get it. But had I do it all over again, I would have had it done in a year. And as I said, NCARB makes that very easy for us. And 5.0 is a great exam. You guys don't have the vignettes that we had in 3.0 and 4.0. The content was a little more memorizing things in 3.0 and 4.0. 5.0, 98.9% of what you're going to learn in any of the divisions in the material for 5.0 will directly make you a better employee and directly make you a better architect. So you should be absorbing this material like a sponge. This should not be dreadful to you, because this is stuff that's going to directly affect your profession, directly make you a better employee, and make you a better employer when you decide to strike out on your own.
It seems every week that I get a call or a chat with someone who they transitioned a test or two over from 4.0. They've had those sitting in their kind of NCARB account, and now their rolling clock is coming up. It's been 4 years. They've got a 5-year rolling clock, and they're at risk of losing those tests they've transitioned over. They've never taken a 5.0 test. Why? Because they've told themselves 5.0 is harder. Well, you can see the evidence shows that that's not the case. They've told themselves that their study materials and all their friends that, the test is totally different, which it is. But they've psyched themselves up or out. They've psyched themselves into this frenzy where, they managed to transition over a test or two, which is great news, but they've now waited 4 years. They haven't made any progress on their license. And now the threat of losing that 1 or 2 transition tests is causing them to scramble. It's just a horrible place to be in. And, as I remind candidates all the time, ultimately NCARB is testing you on your judgment. And if you're doing that, you're kind of avoiding your licensure and letting your rolling clock run out. You're really demonstrating pretty poor judgment. And that's all part of the test too.
Well, there is that, as we talk about many times, that this is much more, this entire licensing process is much more than about picking the correct answer. It's showing your judgment as a professional to get through this process. If you're being very lazy about it, that's not necessarily what, a professional does, right? A professional, to become a professional, you got to work your butt off. So there's definitely a component to that. One statistic I want to talk about, I preempted at the beginning of this podcast because it's one of probably the more interesting stats, and probably, I think, maybe the most important number for candidates listening to this ARE is the chart that NCARB has and the numbers that they have for the retakes. And you'll tell more about this in a second, Eric, but every single division, all 6, the percentage is lower on every single division for retakes. Explain that to me, Eric, because that sounds counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense to me. And I want to listen to this, because if I am one of those candidates who took, for example, PCM, and I need to take it again, I need to understand why it's likely that I'm going to fail it again just based on these numbers. What do we have?
Yeah, this chart was, to me, the most important piece of the NCARB by the numbers report, especially the part about examination. And it's the most telling to me. It was so important that we reviewed it in depth on our group coaching call, just to show this. But basically, you've got pass rates for all 6 exams on the first attempt are way higher, on average anywhere from 6 to 10% higher on their first attempt than they are on the retake. And this is across the board. On all 6 divisions, people did worse on their retake. Why is this? What is happening? And I can tell you exactly what is happening, because David and I experience this on a daily basis in the coaching. What's happening is people take a test, they fail, and they have to do a retake. That's all fine and good, and I guess to be expected, right? You're not going to pass every test on the first try, probably. But when they take their retake,
hold on, let me just stop you for a second. So when I take my retake, my score should improve I should do better. I've seen the exam. I get the content, right? So my score should be better than when I did it before. And maybe one or two divisions, it might be less, but I can't imagine all 6 divisions would show that candidates do worse the second time around.
They do. And the reason is because what your brain is telling you is, oh my gosh, I just took PPD and I failed. When they go to take it again, instead of focusing on what worked, they instead start changing up their game. Their mindset is wrong because their mindset is essentially telling them, well, last time I failed, so this time if I get a similar question, instead of answering A, I'm going to deliberately change my answer to C. And so they're overcompensating and changing up their game. And the thing that they're failing to realize is that you weren't that far off from passing in the first place. So basically you just barely failed. You got, let's say, a C minus, right? And instead you're going in and changing up everything in your game, and you're turning that C minus into a D minus, right? You're actually getting worse. And we see this over and over and over again in the coaching. This overcompensating, this second guessing, and this way overthinking causes their scores to go down. So when I saw this chart, first of all, it didn't surprise me at all, given what we've seen from the candidates. But to me, I love that NCARB was tracking this because it proves what you and I have been seeing for 4 years now with the 5.0 test.
It's crazy. And every single division shows the same trend. Candidates do worse the second time. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Eric, because most candidates who fail a division are very close. Their score sheets are 2s and 3s, right? A combination of. They don't realize that how close they were. I mean, sometimes it's 4 questions, maybe 6 questions. We don't know exactly, but it's not 30 questions that you met, right? Like you're 30 questions away from passing. But to your point is they just see the fail. I failed. I got to change my strategy. And so many times in coaching, we help them keep it in perspective of like, all it means is you just got to take the test again. You're very close. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Brush up on a couple of topics that you need work on, and that's it. But I think to your point, Eric, they just throw out the kitchen sink and just go in with a whole new approach.
Yes.
Or go in, second guessing more, changing answers more the second time around, which we know is detrimental. And it's sometimes for your second time around, you don't really need to do anything different. You just need to take the exam again, and don't monkey with it. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Like a fail does not mean it's broke. It just means it wasn't quite your day. There's a few questions you missed, but I'll give it another go in 2 months, brush up on a few things, and keep doing my same strategy because it's got me this far. But I think as a nervous, anxious candidate, which oftentimes we are, especially on a retake, we tend to be our own worst enemy.
And I know what the candidates are going to say because we talk to them daily. If you're one of these candidates who took a test and failed, and then on your retake, your scores actually went down in certain categories. First of all, I want you to realize that is normal. Number 2, it's somewhat to be expected. And number 3, the reason it's happening is because you're overcompensating and second guessing. Now, remember, you didn't get any feedback on any of those questions. So you don't know if your approach to codes is the right one. You don't know if your approach to, building enclosure systems was the right one. So it's only natural to change it up. But what we've been telling people and what we've been showing people when they show us their score report is if you're straddling the level 2s and 3s, you're straddling that pass-fail line. What it means is, on average, you might only be anywhere from as few as 4 questions away or as many as maybe 12 questions away from passing. So you don't need to change up your game radically. What David and I often tell people is, if you had a better night's sleep the night before or a different breakfast that morning, you could have passed that test. That's how close people straddling that pass-fail line really are. to passing. And so there's no need to overcompensate, second guess, and re-question everything. Instead, it's just do a better job at reading the questions. Take a little more time to, look for the clues in the question. That's really what you need to do.
That's exactly it. It's just reading the question better, understanding it better, because I guarantee when you miss by, 4 to 10 questions or whatever it is, guarantee those questions you missed are not the hard ones that stick with you when you leave the exam. It's the obvious ones that you should have gotten, but you either read it too quick, you sped through it, you missed a very obvious keyword, and that's why you didn't get it. I mean, that's really what's happening when you get your 2s and 3s. It kind of means you weren't reading the questions correctly, if I'm just kind of generalizing here, opposed to, oh my God, I have all these holes in my understanding of stuff, which you don't, because you get 2 and 3s, you're close. You just need to really read the question better.
Yeah, what we've seen time and again is people that straddle those level 2s and 3s on their score report will, on their retake, they'll flip. So the good news is some of those 3s will become 2s, but the bad news is they will overcompensate and turn a lot of those 2s into 3s. But it's always kind of the same thing. And what we see over and over and over again is that, they'll come to us and say, I've taken PPD 5 times and I've gotten a level 2 on every division at one point, just never on the same test. And that's where they say, can you help me? And then that's where we would push them into coaching, because it's like, you really just need to fix your mindset here. Now, if you've gotten level 4s on any of your score report, well, that indicates a deficiency in a certain topic, and you just need to study more, really. But most people fall in that kind of straddling the level 2s and 3s line, and that overthinking can be really painful. And that explains this entire NCARB chart of why all the retakes are lower than the first attempt.
And we've seen a lot of score reports. Obviously, when you pass, you don't get no, you do get the score report when you pass.
No, you just get a pass.
You just get the pass, right? You don't get the score report. And those of us, right, the type A's, that, well, we want to see how well we pass. We want to see, what did we pass by? Did we get 98, whatever it is. But we've seen a lot of score reports. We haven't seen a lot of 4s.
No, they're pretty rare. And I've only seen one score report that was 4s across the board. One out of thousands of score reports that I've seen. Only one with 4s across, and I wish I'd taken a picture of it, actually, because it looked bizarre. But it turned out that they ran out of time. They left a lot of questions unanswered. They were incredibly nervous. It wasn't even an accurate representation of their knowledge base at all. So it was a little unfair, but that's what happens when you run out of time and leave questions blank. Those questions show up as kind of incorrect.
And that's a time management strategy, right? Which we know we need to have for the exams. So yeah, most of the reports we see are 2s and 3s, combination thereof. If you guys look at your old score reports, I guarantee they're mostly 2s and 3s. Maybe an occasional 4 there. But yeah, it's full of 2s and 3s, which means you're close, which means just keep taking an exam every 2 months, fit the retake period in. You will get through this process. Any other stats that were interesting in that report, Eric?
The only other thing was that in 2017, 67% of candidates, 2/3 of candidates, completed their exams within 3 years. In 2020, that number dropped by 11 points, which is a lot. So it's now only 56% of candidates completed their exam within 3 years. They're dragging it out. They're stalling more. Is that because of COVID? I don't know. Is it because of something else? I don't know. There's no data that indicates that. It's just, there's 6 tests. We advise people to take a test every 2 months, no matter what. And when instead what we hear over and over and over again is people want to get through the tests in a year. They take one, they fail, and they take 6 months off. Why? Because they want to avoid that negative feeling. Don't do that. Don't let the outcome of one test affect your plan. If your plan was to take a test every 2 months, then take a test every 2 months, regardless of whether you pass or fail. And then if you fail any, you fit in the retakes. That's really what you have to do. remember, this is a test of your professional judgment. So demonstrate some good judgment here and commit to just getting through all 6 tests.
And you should plan on probably, I think what we're seeing is plan on taking 10 tests within a 1-year period, right? So allowing yourself to fail 4 times, whatever you're going to likely fail. That's part of it. Who cares? But you can get 10 tests. So, right, 6 first tries and then fitting in those retakes. 10 is very doable. And that's kind of the backbone of our coaching program and our study plan and what we keep getting on people about, because we sometimes get in the weeds, right? We sometimes get in our own heads and we become our own worst enemy. We spend too much time on, the ARE forums, right? As you mentioned earlier, Eric, we have to be careful where we're getting our information from, and our motivation, All right. What else? Anything else? Any upbeat? Is there anything that was really upbeat out of this report that is going to make me happy to get out of bed tomorrow morning?
No. No. The full report is definitely worth a look. It's on the NCARB website. It's right up front, and it's broken into lots of different divisions. We really only focused on the COVID impact numbers and the examination numbers. There's a whole section on there about diversity and how people of color have a harder time with the test. And, the good news is NCARB's addressing this and measuring it and working on it. But, those numbers are pretty depressing. It's a pretty grim report, but certainly worth the read. And I only encourage you to read it if it's not going to affect your motivation to finish. Because, when I see something like this and I see that most people are dragging it out, that makes me want to speed it up. So I'm hoping that you're similar to me in that regard. And it's like when you hear that people are dragging this out for years, use that as a cautionary tale to not do that, right? There's so many ways to fall into the excuses. There's so many distractions, right? There's so many things that I hear over and over again. I can tell you out of 20 phone calls that I get, 20 of them tell me I'm a terrible test taker. 20 of them tell me, well, I don't know if I'm qualified for the test. 19 of them tell me, gosh, I didn't go to the right architecture school. It's from my vantage point, it's laughable, because to hear that everybody's a terrible test taker, obviously that's not the case. Don't let your insecurity, your fear, and frankly, your, wanting to avoid something a little painful keep you from finishing this goal. Think about it. You went through architecture school, you worked in the profession, you're at mile 24 in a 26-mile marathon here. Just do the little last minute painful sprint and finish this thing already and get it over with. Don't fall victim to any of those excuses.
I think that is a good point. If you guys wanted to look at those numbers as a motivational tool to be like, yeah, I'm not going to be like those numbers, right? I'm not going to take 2.5 years to finish. Or if I've been at this 5 years, okay, now I'm going to get my crap together and I'm going to finish, within the next 8 months or year, or whatever it is. So yeah, I think there is certainly a way to turn this report into a positive, to give us a little kick in the butt. Because the end goal is we want you guys to get your license, right? And I don't care how many times you fail, as long as you're learning from each one and you don't keep repeating the same mistakes. It's all very very doable. All right, Eric. Any last minute thought?
Only that all of you listening are qualified for this exam. How do I know that? Because NCARB says you're qualified for the exam, and that's good enough for me, right? NCARB's given you an authorization to test, or your state board has given you the authorization to test. You've gone through the process. If you're testing, you're qualified. So just because you work in residential, or because you only do healthcare, or you only do TI work, don't use that as an excuse. All of you are qualified, and all of you are capable of passing these tests. If you need help, we can help you and do it faster, but all of you on your own can do this. Don't let any of these things become excuses and reasons for you to stop your progress. Like I said, just finish this marathon already. You'll feel so much better knowing that it's, not hanging over your head anymore.
And then once you're done, you don't have to listen to us anymore.
Exactly.
Alrighty. On behalf of Eric Corey Freed, my name is David Doucette, and we'll see you guys on the next ARE podcast.
Thanks for listening to the ARE podcast. Be sure to visit architectexamprep.com and check out our other podcast episodes, video tips, and the ARE blog. Remember to plan, practice, and pass.